Welcome to Talking Money, episode 14. I'm delighted to welcome back Hannah Godfrey this week. We've got three hot personal finance topics to talk about this week. We're starting with some changes to the basket used to calculate the rate of price inflation. So, Hannah, are you a fan of white chocolate?
Not particularly, I have to say. I think that's been one that's removed, hasn't it? But they've replaced it with more generic chocolate. I think it's
Maltesers. So Maltesers,
Maltesers.
and the thing that surprised me, and it probably shouldn't have surprised me, is Maltesers or other malted chocolate sweets. And I hadn't really thought of Maltesers as malted chocolate sweets, but I guess that's what they are. I prefer white chocolate to Maltesers. I know this is a bit of a
Oh.
random way to start this conversation.
People are like, "Why are you talking about chocolate?"
Let me give some context briefly then. So the Office for National Statistics, they each year update this virtual basket of goods and services that's used to calculate price inflation. And it's always quite a fun story when it comes out because they talk about the stuff that's taken out and the stuff that's put into this basket of goods and services. And it reflects our changing habits, our changing lifestyles. And white chocolate was just one example. Apparently, we're eating less in the way of white chocolate bars, but Maltesers are a more relevant chocolate. But some other things that left this year include ground coffee, now replaced by coffee bags. And my wife uses these coffee bags, a bit like a tea bag but with coffee in. They're just much more convenient, much less mess. They've got rid of canteen sandwiches because obviously we don't go to offices anymore. We don't eat in the canteen anymore. They've got rid of lamb shoulders on the bone. And they've put other things in as well, which reflects our changing lifestyle. What's do you spot that went into the basket?
Oh, well, I mean, it's just hysterically locked down, to be honest. There's hand gel, which obviously I know people bought beforehand, but they really, really bought this
Mm,
year. Hand weights for home exercise,
yep.
which is something I've bought, and I'm imagining a hell of a lot of other people have. Um, Men's jogging bottoms,
Yes.
loungewear bottoms, and women's sweatshirts, which reflect this sort of shift to, I guess, home working, furlough,
Mm.
essentially staying inside and being comfier. And those are the main ones that kind of stuck out as lockdown to me. I mean, there's couscous has been added, which why people have been eating more couscous in lockdown is something that I don't fully understand. But I thought this was quite interesting because I actually didn't know that this was a thing. But I mean, for anybody that doesn't understand this, I mean, just envision literally a basket.
Mm.
Um, and then it's items that are widely available, bought by many, many households year round, so that the ONS can get a kind of idea of what's going on. And then it's just used to calculate things like CPI, RPI, and things like that. So it's an interesting concept. And to be fair, the iOS, that's not right. The ONS is clearly very on top of trends and
Mm.
what's been going on. But the sad part of all of this is that the cost of living is going up, which it's always going up, it seems. But it's the latest stuff I could find. I actually think the most recent dates are out today, but it's
Mm.
early and I haven't seen them yet. CPI rose 0.7% in January, and that was up from 0.6% in December. And that was because the cost of food and sort of larger home furnishings
Mm.
went up, and particularly things like prawns, frozen fish fingers, and fresh salmon increased. And that was actually because of the widespread disruption to fish processors that's been caused by Brexit. And then kind of, I mean, you can't help but laugh, really. The price of sofas went up. And I think this is because for the first time in living memory, maybe DFS hasn't got a sale on because people have been pumping their money into doing up their homes.
Yeah.
Um, but that was kind of offset by cheaper clothing. Retailers were just putting massive, massive discounts on because, as we just said, with the kind of comfy clothes, people are just not buying clothes. So it was a really, really good time to buy clothes and footwear last month, which actually fell by 4.8% in January. So it's
Yeah.
lots going on.
What I find interesting and always point out to people about this inflation basket is it only contains about 700 goods in total. So it is, as you said, broadly representative of the sorts of things we buy. And the ONS does a fantastic job. They go out there and they measure 180,000 different prices. So they don't just look at 700 goods from Sainsbury's or Morrison's, they look at it from a multiple number of different retailers across the country so they can start to understand regional price variations too. But it is only an average, and your personal price inflation experience is not going to be 0.7% in that year to January. It's going to be based on the sorts of things you buy. And that's why we often talk in financial planning circles about silver inflation. So retired people tend to buy different goods and services to working age people. Obviously, they don't have money to spend on the commute, or nor do working age people anymore. But they have a different experience of the things they buy, and they might spend more on healthcare products, for example, than younger people do. So inflation for older people tends to be a lot higher on average than inflation for younger people. And there's all sorts of quirks like that. So whenever you see that 0.7% CPI figure for that year to January, just keep in mind that isn't the inflation you would have experienced. The inflation you've experienced will depend wholly on the sorts of things that you've bought in the last 12 months, because they may have gone up in price, gone down in price, stayed the same price. And only other thing that went into this basket was hybrid and electric cars for the first time. And I don't think that's been particularly well reported. But obviously, as we move towards the year 2030, and we see the government ban the sale of new diesel and petrol cars, they're going to become the dominant type of cars that people buy new, and therefore the inflation basket should reflect that. And that could do some quite interesting things to inflation, because I think the price of electric vehicles is going to keep coming down as more models get released into the market. We see this with I'm a Tesla fan, but we see it with Tesla. As each new model of Tesla comes out, they become cheaper, and the prices tend to come down for the old ones too. So that could keep inflation down at a time we're all quite worried about inflation going up potentially.
Well, I hope so. I mean, this is all kind of news to me, but you make a very, very good point.
Obviously, it will depend on what you buy. So it will depend on, if you're buying an electric car, that could have a negative impact on your inflation experience. But it is personal. The ONS used to have a personal inflation calculator on their website, and I haven't checked it recently, but you could put in there sort of an average of what you buy, and it would calculate your own personal CPI rate. So that's quite a fun exercise if you're a personal finance nerd like me to do.
No, that really is fun. I wonder what if you would have gone up or down this year, because I think it's really hard to make sense of in a year that doesn't kind of it's so unparalleled to any other year. And actually, I have one more stat it's interesting, but it's very out of date. So the ONS do this kind of year round average expenditure, but the problem is inevitably that it's always a year behind, as we've talked about before. And these were stats that came out yesterday. So average weekly household spending in the UK for the year ending 2020, so bear in mind that was just before the pandemic really, really took hold, was £587.90, which was down slightly from £602 the year before. Obviously, it's going to take us a year before we have any idea of what this looks like. But I imagine anyway, that will go down by at least £100 a week on average when this comes out this time next year, because people have just not really been spending any money. So it's been a good year for saving.